I never thought one moment could change everything. But it did on a cold December night, under the glow of Christmas lights and the scent of cinnamon filling the air. It started innocently enough. A shared laugh. A lingering glance. A touch that lasted just a little too long. But the moment his fingers brushed against mine, something shifted. My breath hitched. My pulse quickened. And suddenly, the man standing in front of me, the one I wasn't supposed to want, became the only thing I could think about. I told myself it was nothing. A harmless mistake. But then his hand didn't let go. And I didn't pull away. I shouldn't be here, I whispered, but I didn't move. Landon's eyes held mine, dark and steady, and my heart slammed against my ribs. Neither should I. His voice was low, almost a growl, and it sent a shiver through me. We were too close, closer than we'd ever been, and yet neither of us stepped back. I felt his warmth, the faint scent of his cologne mixing with the cinnamon still lingering in the air. My knees felt weak, and my thoughts were spiraling. My words faltered as he reached out, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. Vanessa, he said softly, almost like a plea. My name on his lips made my stomach tighten. His thumb traced my jaw, slow and deliberate, before he leaned in. The moment his lips touched mine, my resolve shattered. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but when I didn't pull away, the kiss deepened. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer, and I melted into him. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, only feel. But then the oven timer beeped, loud and sharp, yanking us back to reality. We pulled apart, breathless and wide-eyed, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. I can't, I choked out, stepping back. This is wrong. Landon's jaw tensed, but he nodded. I know. Still, the way he looked at me said something else entirely. Something that made my stomach flip and my knees threatened to give out. And as I turned away, I already knew the truth. This wasn't over. I tried to forget it. I buried myself in work, ignored his lingering glances, and pretended my heart didn't race every time he walked into the room. But it didn't work. Not when he looked at me like that. Not when I caught him watching me, his gaze dark and filled with something I wasn't ready to name. Not when I felt his presence, always too close, always too warm, and it left my skin tingling, craving more. It was worse that night. Robert was away on business again, and Landon and I were alone in the house. I told myself to stay in my room, to lock the door and keep my distance. But then I heard his voice, low and smooth, calling my name from the living room. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, my fingers curling around the banister as I fought the urge to go to him. Vanessa, he called again, softer this time, like he already knew I couldn't resist. And I couldn't. I found him stretched out on the couch, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and his hair still damp from the shower. He looked up at me, his lips tugging into that slow, easy smile that always made my chest tighten. Couldn't sleep? He asked, his voice a little rough. I shook my head, swallowing hard. You should go to bed, Landon. He didn't move. I was waiting for you. My pulse jumped. I should have walked away. But instead, I stepped closer. His eyes darkened as I sank down beside him, our knees brushing. The tension was unbearable, thick and suffocating, and when he reached out to tuck my hair behind my ear, I didn't stop him. You're beautiful, he whispered, his fingers lingering on my skin. I closed my eyes, my breath shaky. We can't. But when I opened them, he was already leaning in, his lips finding mine, soft and slow at first, before heat consumed us both. I didn't stop him. I couldn't. I told myself it was the last time. But the way he kissed me made it impossible to stop. His hands roamed my body, pulling me closer until I felt every inch of him pressed against me. My skin burned where he touched, and the soft moan that escaped my lips only seemed to push him further. Vanessa, he murmured, his lips trailing down my neck, sending shivers through me. I knew it was wrong. Every touch, every breath tangled in desire. It all screamed danger. But I didn't care. Not when his fingers traced the curve of my waist, not when his mouth claimed mine again, harder this time. Say it, he whispered against my lips. Tell me you want this. I couldn't lie, not to him, not to myself. I do, I breathed, my voice trembling. That was all he needed. He pulled me onto his lap, his hands gripping my hips as he kissed me deeper. Desperate, hungry, unstoppable. I clung to him, my nails digging into his shoulders as heat flared between us. The sound of footsteps outside the door made us freeze. I jumped off his lap, my breath ragged, and Landon raked a hand through his hair, trying to steady himself. We waited, but the footsteps faded, and I exhaled a shaky breath. We can't keep doing this, I whispered, even as my body screamed for more. Landon stood, closing the distance between us. His hand cupped my face, his thumb brushing my cheek. "Then tell me to stop," he said, his voice low and steady. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Instead, my hands fisted his shirt, pulling him to me again. This wasn't over. Not even close. I woke up the next morning tangled in guilt and craving more. I avoided Landon all day, pretending to be busy, pretending last night hadn't happened. But the memory of his touch lingered, hot, dangerous, impossible to forget. By the time evening fell, I couldn't take it anymore. I found him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a beer in his hand. He looked up when I walked in, his eyes darkening the moment they met mine. "We need to talk," I said, but my voice shook. "Do we?" His lips curved into a slight smile. "Because I think we already know what this is." I swallowed hard, fighting the heat rising in my chest. "It has to stop." He stepped closer, setting the bottle down with a soft clink. "Then stop me." I didn't move. Before I could think, his hands were on me, pinning me against the counter as his mouth found mine. The kiss was rough, needy, and everything I'd been trying to resist. "Landon," I tried to speak, but he silenced me with another kiss, his tongue teasing mine, making my knees buckle. "You don't want this to stop," he said, his breath hot against my neck. I couldn't deny it. His hands slipped under my shirt, his fingers trailing fire along my skin, and I gasped, arching into him. Every touch felt like a spark, igniting something I couldn't control. "Tell me to stop," he whispered again, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, my fingers dug into his shoulders, pulling him closer, and the rest of the world melted away. But when I opened my eyes and saw the clock flashing midnight, the reality of what we'd just done hit me like a wave. I pushed him away, breathless and trembling. "This is wrong," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then why does it feel so right?" I didn't have an answer. And as I turned to leave, my heart pounding and my lips still tingling from his kiss, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't ready to stop. I told myself to stay away. I even rehearsed what I'd say to him the next time we were alone. That it was over, that it couldn't happen again. But when I saw him the next day, leaning against my office door with that confident smirk, every word vanished. "You've been avoiding me," he said, stepping inside and closing the door. I swallowed hard, my back pressing against the desk. "I've been busy." "Liar." He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands finding my waist as he backed me against the desk. My heart pounded, my breath hitching as his lips brushed against my ear. "Tell me you don't want this," he whispered, his voice low and rough. I couldn't. Instead, I grabbed his shirt, pulling him closer as his mouth crashed against mine. His hands gripped my hips, lifting me onto the desk as his lips trailed down my neck, leaving a trail of heat in their wake. I let out a soft moan, my fingers tangling in his hair, and the sound seemed to push him further. "God, Vanessa," he groaned, his mouth finding mine again. It was reckless, desperate, and completely out of control, but I didn't care. Not when his hands were on me, making me feel alive in ways I hadn't in years. We barely heard the knock at the door. I pushed him away just as it opened, my assistant stepping in and freezing at the sight of us. "Oh, sorry," she stammered, her eyes darting between us. "It's fine," I said quickly, smoothing my hair and stepping away from Landon. "What do you need?" She mumbled something about a meeting, but I wasn't listening. My pulse was still racing, and Landon's eyes never left mine. As soon as she left, I turned to him, my voice trembling. "This can't happen again." He just smirked, stepping closer. "You keep saying that. And the worst part, I knew he was right. Because no matter how wrong it was, I couldn't seem to stop. To be continued. I couldn't think straight anymore. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt his hands on me, his lips against my skin. The guilt was suffocating, but the need was stronger. I told myself to end it. I even rehearsed the words again. But when I found him waiting for me in the dimly lit hallway at work, my resolve shattered. He didn't say a word. He just pulled me into the storage room, slamming the door shut behind us before his mouth claimed mine. I gasped, my back hitting the wall as his hands gripped my hips, pulling me closer. "This is insane," I whispered between kisses, my breath shaky. "Then stop me," he said, his lips trailing down my neck. But I didn't stop him. Instead, I pulled him closer, my fingers tugging at his shirt as heat flooded my body. His hands slid under my blouse, teasing my skin until I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, only feel. "Do you have any idea what you do to me?" he murmured, his voice rough and desperate. I did, because he was doing the same to me. But the moment his lips found mine again, there was a sharp knock at the door. We froze, our breaths ragged. "Vanessa? Are you in there? It was Jessica. Panic shot through me, and I shoved Landon away, smoothing my hair and straightening my clothes. 1 second. I called, my voice high and shaky. He smirked, leaning in close. We're not done, he whispered before slipping out the back door. I opened the door to Jessica, my cheeks burning. She raised an eyebrow, glancing past me into the room. Everything okay? She asked, her voice dripping with suspicion. Fine, I said too quickly. She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes. And as I watched her walk away, I knew we were running out of time. The walls were closing in. The cracks were showing. Jessica wasn't the only one who'd noticed. The lingering glances, the sudden closeness. I could feel the whispers circling around us, growing louder with each passing day. But the worst part? I didn't care. Not when Landon's touch still burned on my skin. Not when his eyes undressed me every time we were alone. I should have ended it. But instead, I found myself texting him that night. 2 simple words that changed everything. Come over. He showed up less than 20 minutes later, his shirt unbuttoned, just enough to make my breath hitch. Are you sure about this? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. I wasn't. But when he stepped closer, his hand brushing my cheek, I didn't stop him. His lips crushed against mine, pushing me back against the wall as his hands roamed my body, desperate, hungry, unstoppable. I moaned against his mouth, my fingers clawing at his shirt as he lifted me, carrying me toward the couch. Clothes fell away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left between us. And when he pushed me down, pinning my wrists above my head, I knew there was no turning back. His name fell from my lips over and over again, each breathless gasp pulling us deeper into the fire we'd started. When it was over, we lay tangled together, our breaths still ragged. This is dangerous, I whispered, my fingers tracing circles on his chest. He caught my hand, pressing it to his lips. Then let's stop pretending we can walk away. I didn't answer, because I knew he was right, and that scared me more than anything. I woke up tangled in his arms, the weight of what we'd done sinking in like a stone in my chest. I slipped out of bed quietly, my heart pounding as I stood in the dark, staring out the window. The guilt was suffocating, but the ache for him was worse. I felt his hands on my waist before I even heard him move. You're running again, he murmured, his voice rough from sleep. I swallowed hard. I don't know how to stop. He turned me around, his fingers tilting my chin until I had no choice but to meet his gaze. Then don't, he said softly, his thumb brushing my lips. I hated how much I needed him. How his touch unraveled me even when I swore I'd hold myself together. His mouth found mine, slow and deliberate, and I melted against him. But as his hands gripped my hips, pulling me closer, a sound froze us both. The front door slammed shut. Robert! Panic shot through me, and I shoved Landon back. Get dressed, I hissed, scrambling to pull on my clothes. I barely made it to the kitchen before Robert's voice called out. Vanessa! I swallowed hard, turning to see him standing there with his suitcase in hand, his eyes sharp and full of suspicion. You're home early, I said, forcing a smile. He set his bag down slowly. Flight was cancelled. I felt the heat of Landon's presence behind me, and my heart slammed in my chest. Robert's eyes flicked past me, narrowing slightly. Where is he? I froze. Who? You know who? His voice was low, dangerous, and I knew he already suspected the truth. Landon stepped into the room before I could stop him, his shoulders squared, his eyes locked on Robert. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Robert's voice broke the silence. How long has this been going on? The room felt like it was closing in. Robert's eyes burned into mine, demanding answers I wasn't ready to give. My mouth opened, but no words came out. Landon stepped closer, his voice steady. It's not what you think. But Robert wasn't buying it. Don't insult me, he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut. I've seen the way you look at her. The way she looks at you. I flinched, guilt flooding my chest. Robert turned to me, his voice breaking. How could you do this to me? Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't have an answer. Landon's hand found mine, squeezing gently, but Robert's gaze dropped to the gesture, and something inside him snapped. You disgust me, he hissed, stepping back like he couldn't stand to be near me. Both of you. Robert, please. No, he cut me off. I don't want to hear it. He grabbed his suitcase and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The silence that followed was deafening. I turned to Landon, my chest tight. What have we done? His arms wrapped around me, pulling me close. We'll figure this out, he whispered. But the truth hung between us, heavy and impossible to ignore. We'd crossed a line we could never uncross, and there was no going back. I wanted to believe we could survive this, that we could build something out of the wreckage we'd caused. But as Landon kissed me again, desperate and full of promise, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of the fallout. The end for now. Want more forbidden stories like this? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned for the next scandalous tale of betrayal and forbidden romance.